The morning sun was bright and promising as Anthony and Layla pulled up to their new home. After years of saving every extra penny and countless hours of overtime, they were finally homeowners. The two-story house with its fresh blue paint and white trim stood proudly in an upscale neighborhood that had always seemed out of reach for them. "Can you believe it?" Layla whispered, squeezing Anthony's hand as they sat in their car for a moment, just taking it all in. "We actually did it." Anthony, usually so composed, couldn't help the wide smile spreading across his face. "All those late nights at the office were worth it," he said, looking at their dream home. As one of the top architects at his firm, he had designed buildings all over the city, but this was different. This was theirs. Layla nodded, thinking about her own journey to become a federal judge. The countless hours studying in law school, the years building her reputation in the courtroom, all leading to this moment. The moving truck rumbled up behind them, breaking their moment of reflection. "Time to get to work," Anthony said, stepping out of the car. He was dressed in worn jeans and his favorite old college t-shirt, not exactly what most people would expect from a successful architect, but perfect for a day of moving boxes. Layla joined him, her curly hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing leggings and a faded sweatshirt. Today, she wasn't Judge Layla Harrison of the Federal District Court. Today, she was just Layla, excited new homeowner with boxes to unpack. The movers began unloading their furniture while Anthony and Layla carried smaller boxes themselves. They worked in a rhythm, laughing when Anthony nearly tripped over a garden hose left by the previous owners. "You okay there, Mr. Graceful?" Layla teased, balancing a box of kitchen supplies on her hip. "Just testing the lawn's softness," he shot back with a grin. What they didn't notice was the woman across the street, watching them with growing disapproval. Nancy Wilson had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and considered herself the unofficial guardian of community standards. From behind her curtains, she observed the black couple with suspicion. "Another neighborhood going downhill," she muttered to herself, grabbing her phone to take pictures of the moving truck and the couple. She noted how they were dressed, so casual, not what she considered appropriate for their upscale street. As the morning wore on, Anthony noticed the woman peeking out her window. Always friendly, he raised his hand to wave. The curtain dropped immediately. "Did you see that?" he asked Layla as they carried a bookshelf together. "See what?" Layla was focused on not dropping her end. "That woman across the street. She's been watching us all morning, and when I waved, she just disappeared." Layla glanced over at the house with its perfectly manicured lawn and stiff curtains. "Maybe she's shy. We'll introduce ourselves properly once we're settled." Anthony nodded, but something about the woman's stare had left him uneasy. Still, he wasn't going to let anything spoil this day. They had worked too hard to get here. By afternoon, the living room was taking shape. The couch faced the large windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. Family photos were arranged on the mantel, pictures of their wedding day, their parents, their college graduations. "I think we need to celebrate," Layla declared, opening a cooler to pull out 2 bottles of sparkling cider. "A toast to our new beginning." They clinked bottles and stood in their half-furnished living room, arms around each other, planning where each piece of furniture would go and dreaming about the dinner parties they would host. Across the street, Nancy's fingers hovered over her phone, scrolling through neighborhood watch apps. She had already taken several more photos of the couple and their friends helping with the move. Something would have to be done about these new neighbors. They just weren't the right fit for this community, she thought to herself, not the right fit at all. Little did she know just who had moved in across the street. And little did the happy couple note the storm that was brewing just across the way. The first week in their new home should have been nothing but joy for Anthony and Layla. Instead, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every morning when Anthony stepped out to get the newspaper, he spotted their neighbor's curtains twitch. When Layla watered the newly planted flowers along their walkway, the woman across the street would suddenly appear on her porch, arms crossed, staring without a word. "Maybe we should go introduce ourselves," Anthony suggested one evening as they sat on their front steps, enjoying the cool breeze. "Clear the air." Layla took a sip of her tea and shook her head. "I smiled at her yesterday when I was bringing in groceries. She just turned and went inside. I don't think she's interested in being friendly." The next day, Anthony was heading to his car when he spotted Nancy checking her mail. He raised his hand in a friendly wave. "Good morning," he called out. Nancy looked at him, pressed her lips together in a thin line, and walked back inside without a word. "That went well," Anthony muttered to himself. He tried not to let it bother him as he drove to work, but something about the woman's cold stare stuck with him all day. That weekend, Anthony decided to start on the backyard deck project he'd been planning. The previous owners had left the deck in bad shape. Rotting boards and loose railings made it unsafe. He'd carefully filed for all the necessary permits weeks ago, making sure everything was properly approved before they even moved in. The spring day was perfect for outdoor work. Anthony set up his tools early, around 9 in the morning, careful not to make noise too early. He put on his work gloves and began removing the damaged boards, humming along to the radio playing quietly beside him. He'd been working for about 2 hours when he heard someone clear their throat loudly. Anthony looked up to see Nancy standing at the edge of his yard, arms crossed tightly across her chest, face pinched with annoyance. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. "Do you have to make all this racket?" Anthony straightened up slowly. "I'm sorry if it's bothering you. I'm just fixing our deck." On a Saturday, Nancy's eyebrows shot up. Some people appreciate peace and quiet on weekends. "I checked the noise ordinances," Anthony explained calmly. "Construction is allowed between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. on weekends. I made sure to start well after 8. Nancy's eyes narrowed. "Do you have permits for this work? This is a historic neighborhood with strict codes." Anthony wiped his hands on his jeans and tried to keep his voice even. "Yes, ma'am. All properly filed and approved. Would you like to see them?" "People like you need to learn how things work around here," Nancy snapped, ignoring his offer. "This neighborhood has standards." The words hung in the air between them. Anthony felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd had countless times before when someone's prejudice became unmistakably clear. "People like me," he repeated quietly. Nancy didn't respond. She just gave a final disapproving look at the work he'd done and walked away, her back stiff. Anthony stood there for a long moment, hammer still in hand. He took a deep breath and slowly let it out. When Layla came outside a few minutes later with a glass of lemonade for him, she immediately noticed the change in his mood. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the drink down. He told her about the encounter, trying to keep his voice steady. Layla's expression darkened as she listened. "It's 2025, she said, shaking her head. "You think people would be beyond this by now." Anthony picked up a nail and turned it between his fingers. "I've dealt with this my whole life, in school, at work, even with clients sometimes. I just didn't expect it here in our own home." Layla put her hand on his shoulder. "This is our home. We earned it. We belong here just as much as anyone else." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of distant lawnmowers and children playing filling the air around them. Finally, Anthony picked up his hammer again. "The deck won't build itself," he said with a small smile. "And it's going to be beautiful when it's done." Across the street, Nancy watched from her window, phone in hand, already planning her next move. 2 weeks after moving in, Anthony and Layla finally felt settled enough to have friends over. They'd been so busy unpacking and dealing with the deck repairs that they hadn't had a chance to properly celebrate their new home. "Just a small gathering," Layla told Anthony as they prepared for the evening. "Nothing too loud." By 6 o'clock, their backyard was filled with the smell of grilling burgers and the sound of gentle laughter. 8 friends had joined them, mostly colleagues from work and a couple they'd known since college. Someone brought a portable speaker playing soft jazz, barely audible beyond their yard. Wine glasses clinked as they toasted to new beginnings. To finally having space for a real dining table, Anthony joked, gesturing to the patio set they'd bought just for this occasion. His friend Thomas, a fellow architect, raised his glass. "And to never having to hear your neighbors fighting through those thin apartment walls again." Everyone laughed, unaware that across the street, Nancy was pacing back and forth in her living room, phone clutched in her hand. She'd been watching the gathering for nearly an hour, taking photos whenever someone new arrived. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance," she said into her phone, curtains pulled just enough to peek through. "Excessive noise and a large gathering at 1423 Maple Street. It's been going on for hours. In the backyard, Layla was sharing stories about her early days as a lawyer when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Anthony said, setting down his plate. "Probably Mike and Diane. They said they might be late." But when he opened the front door, 2 police officers stood on his porch. Anthony's smile faded instantly. "Good evening, sir," the taller officer said. "I'm Officer Rodriguez, and this is Officer Chen. We received a noise complaint about this address." Anthony blinked in surprise. "A noise complaint? We're just having a small barbecue with friends. The music isn't even loud." "Mind if we come in and take a look?" Officer Rodriguez asked. Anthony stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Of course, we're just in the backyard." As they walked through the house, Anthony noticed Officer Chen looking around, taking in the framed diplomas on the wall and the family photos on the mantel. In the backyard, conversations stopped as soon as the officers appeared. Layla stood up from her chair, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. "We received a complaint about noise and suspicious people gathering at this address." "Suspicious people?" Thomas repeated, looking around at the group of professionals in casual summer clothes. Officer Chen had the decency to look embarrassed. "Ma'am, this is actually the 3rd call we've received this week from the same neighbor." Layla's eyebrows rose. "The 3rd? What were the other complaints about?" The officer hesitated, then admitted there was a report of potential drug activity when someone was unloading groceries from their car trunk on Tuesday, and another about unknown individuals possibly casing houses when. He checked his notes. When a man was jogging in the neighborhood around 7 p.m. on Thursday. Anthony closed his eyes briefly. "That was me. I jog every evening after work." A heavy silence fell over the group. Everyone understood exactly what was happening. Layla took a deep breath. "Officer, I'd like to know exactly what tonight's complaint stated." Just then, Layla's colleague Patricia spoke up. "Look across the street, 3rd window from the left." Everyone turned to see Nancy quickly stepping back from her window, the glow of her phone still visible. "She's been watching us all night," Patricia said quietly. Officer Rodriguez sighed. "Look, we have to respond to all calls, but I can see there's clearly no issue here. The music is reasonable. Everyone is behaving appropriately." "This isn't about noise," Layla said firmly. She stepped closer to the officers, maintaining perfect composure despite her growing frustration. "This is harassment, and I'd like to know what options we have to address it." As she spoke, Officer Chen was looking at her more carefully, a flash of recognition crossing his face. "Ma'am, excuse me, but are you Judge Layla Harrison?" he asked suddenly. Across the street, Nancy pressed closer to her window, watching as the officer's entire demeanor seemed to change. Something was happening, something she hadn't anticipated. The smug satisfaction she'd felt while making the call began to fade as she watched the scene unfold. The backyard fell silent as Officer Chen's question hung in the air. "Are you Judge Layla Harrison?" Layla nodded slowly, her expression calm but firm. "Yes, I am." Officer Chen's posture changed immediately. He stood a little straighter, and the slight dismissiveness that had been in his voice disappeared completely. "Your Honor, I didn't recognize you at first," he said, his tone now respectful. "I've seen you preside in courtroom 304. Last month, that big corporate fraud case." Officer Rodriguez looked between his partner and Layla, confusion giving way to understanding. "You're the federal judge. The one who made that ruling on the civil rights case last year." "One and the same," Anthony said, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders with quiet pride. The officers exchanged glances, and it was clear they were reassessing the entire situation. "Your Honor," Officer Rodriguez began, clearing his throat, "I want to apologize for the disturbance. We're required to respond to all complaints, but," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "But you're starting to see a pattern here," Layla finished for him. Her voice remained professional, the same tone she used in her courtroom when addressing witnesses. 3 calls in 1 week, all regarding normal activities. First, unloading groceries, then my husband jogging. Now, a small dinner party with the music at a reasonable level. Across the street, Nancy remained glued to her window. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the officer's body language completely change. Instead of breaking up the party, they seemed to be apologizing. One of them was even nodding along to whatever the woman was saying, looking impressed. Back in the yard, Officer Chen pulled out his notepad. "Ma'am, Your Honor, we'll be filing a report about this. Making false police reports is actually against the law, and 3 in 1 week shows a clear pattern of harassment." Thomas, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "I'm a witness to tonight's events. The music was barely audible from the front yard. I checked when I arrived. There was absolutely nothing that warranted a noise complaint." Patricia, Layla's colleague from the courthouse, added, "And I saw the neighbor watching us and taking photos all evening. It was uncomfortable." Officer Rodriguez nodded. "We'll speak with her directly. This kind of behavior wastes police resources and creates unnecessary tension in the community." Layla's friend Diane, who worked as a civil rights attorney, had been silently fuming since the officers arrived. She finally spoke up. "This isn't just about wasted resources. This is about using the police as a weapon against people of color. It happens every day across this country." An awkward silence followed, but Layla broke it with a gentle hand on Diane's shoulder. "And that's exactly the kind of case I hear too often in my courtroom," she said quietly. Officer Chen looked genuinely troubled. "Your Honor, I promise you we'll address this properly." As the officers prepared to leave, Anthony walked them to the front door. Through the window, he could see Nancy still watching from across the street. When she realized the officers were leaving without shutting down the gathering, her face showed clear confusion. "She's watching right now," Anthony told the officers quietly. "She probably expected a very different outcome." Officer Rodriguez looked across at Nancy's house. "We're going to have a conversation with your neighbor right now. She needs to understand that what she's doing is harassment, plain and simple." "Thank you," Anthony said. "We just want to live peacefully in our new home." As the officers crossed the street toward Nancy's house, they walked with purpose, shoulders back, expressions serious. Nancy's curtain dropped quickly, and seconds later, her porch light switched on. Back in the yard, Layla's friends were still processing what had happened. "So," Thomas said, trying to lighten the mood, "does this mean we get special treatment if we get a speeding ticket?" "Sorry, officer, I'm friends with a federal judge." The tension broke as everyone laughed, though there was still an undercurrent of heaviness to the evening. Layla shook her head, smiling despite everything. "Absolutely not. But it does mean the next time someone tries to weaponize their assumptions against us, they might be in for a surprise." Across the street, Nancy opened her door to find 2 police officers standing on her porch, their expressions leaving no doubt that her plan had backfired spectacularly. The morning after the barbecue, Nancy's house was unusually quiet. Her curtains remained closed, and her car stayed in the driveway even though it was a weekday. The police visit had lasted nearly an hour, and neighbors on both sides had noticed the officer's presence. Meanwhile, the news traveled fast. Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down was the first to call her friend who ran the neighborhood book club. "You won't believe who moved into the old Wilson place," she whispered into the phone. "That federal judge, the one from the news last month, and her husband is the architect who designed the new community center downtown." By noon, at least a dozen neighbors knew who Anthony and Layla really were. The story of Nancy's complaints and the police visits circulated rapidly, each retelling adding more details until it seemed half the neighborhood had witnessed the confrontation. Nancy first realized something had changed when she went to get her mail around 2 in the afternoon. Her next-door neighbor, an older man who usually gave her a friendly wave, barely nodded in her direction before hurrying back inside. At the end of the street, a group of women who were walking their dogs suddenly found something interesting to look at in the opposite direction when they spotted her. Confused and increasingly uncomfortable, Nancy retreated back inside. She made herself a cup of tea and tried to shake off the feeling that she had become the neighborhood outcast overnight. Maybe she was imagining things. Then her phone rang. It was Lisa, the neighborhood association president. "Nancy," Lisa said, her voice stiff and formal, "I thought you should know that Judge Harrison and her husband will be attending our monthly neighborhood meeting next week. I've personally invited them." Nancy's hand tightened around her mug. "Judge, I don't." "Nancy, please," Lisa interrupted. "Everyone knows what happened." The police officers spoke to several neighbors after they left your house last night, making false reports about a federal judge. What were you thinking? Nancy felt her face grow hot. I didn't know she was a judge, she stammered. And that makes it okay. Lisa's voice was sharp now. Would it have been acceptable if she was a teacher, or a nurse, or anything else? The line went quiet for a moment. The point is, Lisa continued, her voice softening slightly, you've put us all in an awkward position. Judge Harrison is a respected public figure. There was an article about her in last month's City magazine. She's being considered for higher courts. Nancy sank into her kitchen chair, the full weight of her mistake finally hitting her. I had no idea. And her husband, Lisa continued, designed the community center everyone's so proud of. The one you specifically praised at last month's meeting. After hanging up, Nancy opened her laptop with shaking hands and searched for Layla's name. Dozens of results appeared immediately. News articles about important cases, interviews where she spoke about justice reform, photos of her receiving awards. In one picture, Layla stood next to the governor, both of them smiling as she accepted an achievement award for her work on civil rights cases. The architect husband was just as accomplished. Anthony's firm had designed not only the community center, but several other prominent buildings in the city. There was even a short video of him explaining the environmentally sustainable features of a new downtown office building. Nancy closed her laptop and looked out her window at the house across the street, the house she had been so determined to drive them away from, the house where two highly accomplished professionals had chosen to make their home. Later that afternoon, Nancy spotted Anthony getting out of his car after work. She quickly stepped back from her window, not wanting to be caught watching them again. But not before she saw several neighbors approach him with warm smiles and handshakes, welcoming him properly to the neighborhood. That evening, as Nancy heated up a microwave dinner for one, she heard laughter from across the street. Looking out, she saw an older couple bringing what looked like a homemade casserole to Anthony and Layla's front door. More welcome gifts, more neighbors introducing themselves. Nancy ate her dinner alone, the TV on but unwatched, as she tried to figure out how everything had gone so terribly wrong and what, if anything, she could do to fix the mess she'd created. The neighborhood meeting was held in the community center on the following Tuesday evening. The large room with its wall of windows and comfortable seating was nearly full, unusual for what was typically a sparsely attended monthly gathering. Nancy arrived early, slipping into a seat in the back row. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who normally would have greeted her warmly. The cold shoulder treatment had continued all week. No one had invited her to the weekend potluck. The walking group she'd been part of for years suddenly had a new schedule that no one had bothered to share with her. At precisely 7 o'clock, Lisa called the meeting to order. After going through routine announcements about upcoming road repairs and reminders about trash collection days, she paused and looked around the room. Now, I'd like to take a moment to properly welcome our newest neighbors, she said, gesturing toward the front row where Anthony and Layla sat side by side. Would you both mind coming up here? The couple made their way to the front of the room while everyone applauded. Nancy sank lower in her seat, wishing she could disappear entirely. For those who haven't had the chance to meet them yet, Lisa continued, this is Judge Layla Harrison and her husband, Anthony Harrison. Layla serves as a federal judge in our district court, and Anthony is the lead architect at Harrison and Associates, whose work includes this very building we're sitting in. More applause filled the room. Anthony gave a small wave while Layla smiled graciously. We're thrilled to have you both in our community, Lisa said, then turned to address everyone. I think it's important that we show our new neighbors what this neighborhood is really about: respect, community, and looking out for each other. The pointed comment wasn't lost on anyone. Several heads turned supply toward the back of the room where Nancy sat, her face burning with embarrassment. After the formal meeting ended, people gathered in small groups, chatting over cookies and coffee. A line formed around Anthony and Layla as neighbors introduced themselves one by one. The couple responded to each person with genuine warmth, showing no sign that their first days in the neighborhood had been anything but pleasant. I love what you did with the gardening beds, one woman told Layla. The previous owners never bothered with flowers. "My son is studying architecture in college," an older man told Anthony. "He nearly fell over when I told him the designer of the community center lives across the street from us now." Nancy watched from her corner, a paper cup of untouched coffee growing cold in her hands. She noticed that no one approached her, not even people she'd known for years. When she tried to join a conversation about the upcoming summer block party, the group shifted slightly, closing the circle and effectively shutting her out. Halfway through the social hour, Nancy decided she couldn't take it anymore. She tossed her cup in the trash and headed for the exit, hoping to slip away unnoticed. As she reached the door, she heard someone call her name. She turned to find Mr. Rivera, the retired high school principal who lived at the end of the block. "Tough evening?" he asked quietly. Nancy nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. "I made a terrible mistake." Mr. Rivera looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, in my 40 years as an educator, I learned something important about mistakes. They're only truly mistakes if you don't learn from them." "The whole neighborhood hates me now," Nancy whispered. "Not hate," Mr. Rivera corrected. "Disappointed, maybe. Confused, certainly. We've always thought of ourselves as a welcoming community. What you did, it made us all look bad." Nancy glanced back at the room, where Layla was laughing at something one of the neighbors had said. "I don't think I can fix this." "You could try," Mr. Rivera suggested. "Not tonight, but eventually." After Nancy left, the gathering continued. Someone suggested organizing a proper welcome dinner for Anthony and Layla. Another neighbor offered to help Anthony with contacts at the permit office for his deck repairs. A third shared information about a book club that Layla might enjoy. "This is so kind of everyone," Layla said, genuinely touched by the warm reception. "We were a little worried after those first few days, but this feels like home now." What neither Anthony nor Layla mentioned was the empty chair in the back of the room or the woman who had slipped out early. They had decided between themselves that they wouldn't speak publicly about what had happened. They would move forward with dignity and allow the community to respond in its own way. And respond it had, with a clear message that prejudice would not be tolerated, not in this neighborhood, not against anyone. A month passed. The summer heat settled over the neighborhood, bringing with it afternoon thunderstorms and evening fireflies. Life fell into a rhythm for Anthony and Layla. They finished their deck, planted a vegetable garden, and gradually made their house feel like home. Nancy had become nearly invisible. Her car appeared and disappeared from her driveway, but she was rarely seen outside. No one mentioned her name at community events, though everyone noticed her absence. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Layla was pushing a shopping cart through the produce section of the local grocery store when she rounded a corner and came face to face with Nancy. For a moment, both women froze. Nancy's cart was half filled with basics: bread, milk, a few apples. Layla had just picked up a bunch of fresh basil. Nancy looked thinner than before, with dark circles under her eyes. She glanced at Layla, then down at her cart, and started to turn away. "Nancy, wait," Layla said quietly. Nancy stopped, her knuckles white, as she gripped the shopping cart handle. She seemed unable to look Layla in the eye. I should go," Nancy mumbled. Layla shook her head. "We live across the street from each other. We can't avoid each other forever." The produce section was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. An employee stacking oranges nearby was the only other person within earshot. Nancy took a deep breath. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice barely audible. "What I did was wrong. Inexcusable, really." Layla didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of Nancy's words hang in the air between them. "Why did you do it?" she finally asked, her tone not accusing but genuinely curious. Nancy looked up, meeting Layla's eyes for the first time. "I could give you excuses, tell you about how I was raised, or what neighborhood I grew up in. But the truth is," her voice caught, "the truth is that I was wrong. I saw you and your husband, and I made assumptions based on nothing but the color of your skin." A customer passed by with a cart, forcing both women to step closer to the lettuce display. "I've never had a black neighbor before," Nancy continued, her voice steadier now. "I was afraid of change, and instead of getting to know you, I let my fear turn into something ugly." Layla listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. As a judge, she'd heard many apologies over the years, some sincere, others merely performances to seek lighter sentences. Those police calls could have been dangerous, Layla said. You put my husband at risk every time he walked out the door with police expecting a criminal. Nancy nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I know that now. I've been educating myself, reading books, watching documentaries, things I should have done years ago. She paused. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. Layla considered this. Recognizing a mistake is the first step toward fixing it. I don't know if I can fix this, Nancy admitted. Maybe not entirely, Layla agreed. But you can do better going forward. That's what justice is about, not just punishment, but growth and change. The two women stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by colorful produce and the soft beeping of checkout counters in the distance. The neighborhood is planning a diversity workshop next month, Layla said finally. It wasn't my idea. Lisa from the association suggested it. Might be a good place to start. Nancy nodded slowly. I'll be there. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Nancy hesitated. Can I ask you something? Why are you even talking to me right now? After what I did? Layla smiled slightly. In my courtroom, I see people at their worst moments. But I'd also believe people can change if given the right opportunity. I'm willing to give you that opportunity. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood gathered for a summer block party. Anthony manned the grill, expertly flipping burgers while chatting with neighbors. Layla sat with a group of women discussing books they'd recently read. And on the edge of the gathering was Nancy, quiet but present, helping set up the dessert table with Mrs. Chen. She still received cool looks from some neighbors, but others had begun to cautiously include her again. Real change would take time. True forgiveness couldn't be rushed. But across the street from each other, two households had found a way to coexist with respect, if not friendship. And in a neighborhood that had almost been torn apart by prejudice, that small step forward meant everything.